I'm going to turn the webinar over to Beth Golding. She's Florida State Archivist and also a member of CoSA's Education and Training Committee, and she's our moderator today. So Beth, I'll turn the microphone over to you now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to the late February CoSA member webinar. We've got a really informative program lined up for today. We've got our two speakers from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, and they'll update us on all things NHPRC, especially the grant programs that we all love to hear about. There are some new grant programs we know you'll be interested in. Following those presentations, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers, and then we'll take a look at some upcoming programs and webinars. So I'll start off introducing our two speakers for today. We're really pleased to have with us NHPRC Executive Director Christopher Eck. Chris was appointed Executive Director in April of 2018. Before that, he was the Terrestrial Archaeology Program Manager for the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, working with archivists and historians and archaeologists around the world to research, locate, and recover remains of missing American military personnel from past wars. Chris has also served as Federal Preservation Officer for First Responders Network Authority, served as National Cultural Resources Program Manager for the Air National Guard Headquarters at Joint Base Andrews. He served as Regional Preservation Officer for U.S. General Services Administration in Atlanta, and also as head of the Metropolitan Historic Preservation Offices for both Fort Lauderdale and Miami. Chris has a bachelor's degree in history from Loyola University, New Orleans, master's degree in history and historical archaeology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and a law degree from the University of Miami. We're also happy to welcome back to the CoSA webinar microphone NHPRC's Director for State Programs, Dan Stokes. Dan attended college and graduate school at the University of Cincinnati and then moved to Washington, D.C. in 1987 to work for NHPRC as a program officer. Dan became an archives specialist in 1995, focusing on architectural records, the records of religious institutions, Native American records, and local government records, and he was named NHPRC's Director for State Programs in 2009. So with that, I will turn the program over to Executive Director Chris Eck.
Hello. Hi, this is Chris Eck calling from the NHPRC, and just want to say hello to everyone. In case you hadn't heard, the NHPRC has been closed due to the government shutdown from December 22nd to January 26th. And we were part of that group of over 800,000 federal employees that hadn't been working for several weeks over the Christmas break and into the new year. So if you tried to call the NHPRC or reach out to us during that time, we weren't able to help anyone or call you back or correspond, but we've been back to work now for going on 4 weeks, trying to catch up on all the things that have been left unattended during that time. One of the things that the shutdown seems to have affected for us, and looking at what the effect on programs is that we received about half the normal number of applications for our Access to Historical Records Major Initiatives grant period. The deadline closed during the shutdown. Grants could have been submitted during that time. I think there was an understanding from some people that we may not have been able to put anything through, and that affected the number of applicants that came in. We're getting to all of those grants that did come in right now, and the numbers wouldn't allow us to extend the deadline because the number of grant review panels that would have had to be set up and the follow-on effect to our May commission meeting, which is coming up in May. We wouldn't have been time to reschedule and extend the deadline. So unfortunately, we have about half the number of applications that we normally do. However, the money, because it's money for all year, will go into what the commission can continue to use for other programs. So we didn't lose any money by way of having less applications come in at this time. One thing that did happen as a result of this shutdown, because one of our other programs, the Digital Editions Publishing Cooperatives, those grant application deadline was supposed to initially be tomorrow, March 1st, and that has been extended to March 15th. This is partly due to the fact that this was only the draft deadline for drafts to come in, and that program is funded through the Mellon Foundation, as many of you may have heard of. And so there is a couple extra weeks for that if you were still looking to put in a draft application, and then the final deadline remains May 1st. And speaking of grants, and particularly just to CoSA members, the Commission has had a great deal of interest and a pretty good response to the initiative that the Commission approved this past year for looking at early legal records. A number of the grants that have come in various categories have touched on this, and I know that because of what all of you do in the state archives, that this was of interest to a number of folks throughout the states and territories. And I'd encourage all of you to continue to think about how the Commission's desire to see more applications dealing with early legal records in each state and territory in the District of Columbia and the various repositories might benefit from one of the programs where this is applicable. One of the questions that's come up fairly frequently is what is early in terms of early legal records, and that's going to be variant depending on where you are in the country. What's early in New England may not be what's early in Alaska. And what the intent was to leave it broad enough so that people could consider what records and resources they have dealing with early legal records and all the information that's contained in them, as the wealth of information of which the Commission has touched on very little over the last 40-odd years of funding grants, and put in an application based on making the argument that what's early for you is still important regardless of whether it's early somewhere else in the country. So just think about that. I'd also encourage all of you to send to us any news of successful re-grants that you've had, because the information that you have from those that get grants from all of you and the SHRABs, we take that information whenever we hear of stories, and I share that with the Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero, as well as the commissioners, and this helps get the word out about the great work that all of you are doing throughout the country. And believe me, it helps for the Commission and the Commission staff to demonstrate the good work that you're doing, and by extension the work that the Commission is doing in terms of the value of its program to the country. And that gets looked at in terms of the arguments that get made for future funding. So if you have a program that's been funded through a re-grant and you'd like to share it with us, please feel free. It's important that we know what all of you are doing, particularly if you've gotten good press, even if it's in something fairly small. We'd like to see it. And then know that it does have a follow-on effect potentially in raising the awareness of what the Commission programs do and the money that's given to us through Congress. So speaking of money from Congress, our new budget allocates the same level of funding that we've received in the last several years, which is $6 million level funding that we've received for the remainder of this FY19. And one thing to think about is, as this money goes through the end of the year, and the current budget deal that the Congress has agreed upon will get us through September, is that this will also be coming up at the same time as Congress is debating the budget, the debt ceiling, and how that affects what the budget will be for next year. So there's going to be a very interesting fall, I imagine, with new discussions about what federal agencies should be funded at, and this comes at a time when the debt ceiling has to be raised, or we may go into other budget issues that we've seen in the past few years. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the same kind of questions that came up about whether there could be a threat of a government shutdown revisit themselves come this fall in September. And in relation to that, I want to let all of you be aware that NARA as a whole, the National Archives, has gotten a hit from this year's budget as it was approved. They took more than $11 million in cuts. So that will have follow-on effects to some of the other branches of the National Archives, and I just want all of you to be aware of that. Lastly, in speaking about reaching out to us and sending us news of the successful programs that you are working on so that we're aware of them and we can share that information, please feel free to always reach out to me if you'd like. My email here is Christopher, CHRISTOPHER.Eck, ECK, @nara.gov. I'm always happy to receive information from people if they have questions about anything, and direct you to some of our program officers if I need to, or answer them directly if I can. And look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Okay, Dan's next.
Dan, I am on board here. There we go. We have our slide up. I'm going to repeat somewhat a little bit of what Chris has said as it relates more directly to you. As he stated, there was a government shutdown for about 4 weeks, which is different from operating under a continuing resolution. So I wanted to make sure you all understood that under a continuing resolution or a shutdown, we can't make any awards. So those of you who received funding offers from the November meeting, we're just now doing grant awards for you because the government has opened up and we now have money to spend. Under a shutdown, we also cannot make payments to current grants. Your money is still safe and you still have your grant, but during a shutdown, there's no one here who can move payments forward to the Treasury Department. So you may want to mark, those of you who have grants may want to mark on your calendars that in September you need to make sure you submit payment requests to make sure you can get through possible from 1 day to a 2-month delay in getting your money for those of you who are not able to front the money you need for some of your grant activities. You have to have it before you can engage in your activities. So we'll remind you of that in the fall to make sure that you have some funds available so that you don't run out in case there's another shutdown. At the November meeting also, the Commission talked about the board programming grants and reviewed a paper that CoSA had submitted about possibilities of adjusting the program. And they were able to implement new guidelines in the grant announcement that does take care of one of the issues that was brought up. So what we will be offering, and the announcement is up on the our website now, with a mid-June deadline for applications and an April deadline for drafts, which I encourage you to submit. We'll be continuing the current program in which you can have up to $40,000 for 1 year or up to $80,000 for 2 years. That'll be the same, and it is open for a wide array of programming of whatever you have decided is appropriate for your state. The second program, which is in the announcement, is called Level 1, and the current program is called Level 2, will offer grants of up to $12,000 for 1 year, and this is doesn't have an option for a 2-year application. These are for 1 year, and they are for more limited activities. You can apply for one or the other, but you can't apply for both. This is not like the old program where you could get basic funding and then a second level of funding as well. These are, you do one or the other. For the up to $12,000, the main programming emphases on this are strategic planning, whether it be a major event that takes place over several months or a shorter meeting. You just can decide what type of strategic planning you need. Funding can be used for hiring a facilitator, for travel, if you want to bring everybody together, other expenses such as that. It's for training, which either you may offer or you may bring other people in. The Texas board is currently offering workshops for digitization that are provided by SAA, so they don't have to do the workshops themselves, so that's always an option to find someone else who will do that. Offering scholarships, which can be used by people to go to any training that they choose to take. If you have the option of either offering a workshop or providing scholarships so people can go to whatever events they want. A few states do this. I just got a report from Illinois, and they offered scholarships from one person who took AASLH's Basics of Archives workshop, and someone else took providing access to Born Digital Archives. So people are taking a huge variety of workshops that relate to what type of training they need. So both of those or either of those are options. Public engagement activities, which can be anything that helps the public get involved in archives, either using records or learning about records. Maryland is doing several activities this year that are based on that. They're having something that's called a brick wall meeting, in which if you've kind of run up against a brick wall in your research, they'll have people there who can maybe offer you ideas of how to move beyond. Like if you're stuck on your family tree and need to learn what other types of records are available to do genealogy, they'll be there to help, and other things like that. Resource development, developing types of resources that address the needs, particularly of smaller repositories, but that can be used broadly so that they're not too limited in what they do. California has done a lot in this area by doing things such as how to develop programming, how to develop, how to manage a project, things like that they have found are missing and that can help people who need basic assistance. These are not guaranteed. I know that one issue that was brought up was that these would be similar to block grants, and if you applied under this, you kind of automatically get funding as long as you had followed all the instructions. And the Commission has never decided to make things automatic like that, and so these are still competitive, and that's why I did mention the draft deadline, because even for these simpler ones, it'd be good to have a draft to help ensure that you're going to be competitive with other applications that come in. Now, if you want to request only about $12,000 a year, that does not mean you have to apply under the level 1. If you want to do a small re-grant program or some other more expansive programming, but it's not going to cost you a lot, you can request still funding under the old program and request maybe $12,000 or $24,000 for 2 years to do some other more expensive programming. So this is not meant just for those who want $12,000 or less. It's for people who are doing, I don't want to say limited programming, but very specific types of programming that don't require quite the documentation that bigger projects do. Because the $40,000 grants require up to 20 pages of narrative, and these $12,000 grants, the narrative is limited to 7 pages, so there's not as much paper to be filled out, which we hope you will appreciate. And I'll certainly appreciate not having to read all 20 pages. So it's a win-win for all of us, so that's good. Funding available for this program has been increased to $800,000. That doesn't mean we'll give away that much, and it also could mean that if we have it, we would give away more. These are just kind of guidelines that we follow as we review applications in the various grant programs to make sure we don't go into deficit spending, which is a novel government idea, but we follow that. Some things that we're looking for in the state board grants, a new area that we have added is to demonstrate, you must be able to demonstrate that all digitization projects will result in online access. One issue that had come up in the past was that a lot of smaller institutions tend to use digitization as their preservation means and don't think of it as an access tool. And this is becoming less prominent, fortunately, because of the work a lot of you have done to make sure they know that access is also important. So putting procedures in place that will help ensure that your re-grant applicants have the capacity to do a digitization project, and that you don't find out halfway through the project that they really don't know quite what they're up to. So making sure that in your application you can require some kind of documentation that they actually are capable of doing this project, or that you can provide the assistance to them to give them that capacity in some way, or an institution near them can help out. We've also found in some of the reports we get once the regrants have finished that some of these applicants have said they hope to place the records online at some point in the future, and we want to avoid that. We want them to be available at the end, by the end of the process. And once again, if you need to develop some kind of a program that helps them do that, then that would be workable. I think at the last, either the town hall or some previous webinar, I talked about North Carolina's project where they're actually going out to institutions, collecting their records, having them digitized and uploaded, and then taking the records back so that they're allowing people who maybe don't have the capacity to do it to get it done. And part of that is also training so that they do learn how to do it in the future, so that you might be able to add to what's already online in the future by doing it themselves. We have provide evidence of recent efforts or plans to identify needs. In many applications, we're just hearing, here's the programming we're doing, and there's no evidence that anyone wants you to do that type of programming. So some type of either survey responses or outreach that you've done, or information you've gathered through your state or regional archives organization, or some evidence that what you're doing is something that people want. And then also, why are you doing this particular activity? I'm sure in many states there's 3 or 4 times what you could be doing, but you have to decide which you're capable of doing. And so kind of why you selected the projects that you have is going to be important as well. Outreach plans for expanding public understanding and use of records. Another area we found is that especially some regrants, they process their collections, or they rehouse their collections, or do whatever work is necessary, and there's nothing in the reports to say, and here's what we're doing so people find out about what we do. There's no open house or no solicitation to bring in students to look at the records, or some kind of activity that will let people know that these records are now available. We do get some news stories that identify lots of outreach activities. We have folks who have gone to the city or county councils and said, here's what we've done, and has gotten support, sometimes even monetary support for other activities, by letting people know we now have this stuff and it's available for people to use, and it's not just for the what we call the serious researcher, but for anyone who is interested in these. So that, plus any kind of public programming they can have to make sure that we know that the efforts to preserve the records also help to provide a level of access. And another area we've added is made more explicit is present information about efforts to reach out to underserved communities and address the issues of institutional advancement and sustainability. Those are our new big words. Things like tracking who is receiving assistance through scholarships, training, regrants, visiting archivists, whatever, and finding out what parts of the state maybe are not getting the resources that they may need. I know I was on the phone with the Illinois board, and they said they have a map. I know Kansas has a map. Massachusetts has a map where they put markers to show here's where we have done our work, and you can look at that and say, well, here's a big chunk that's empty, or there isn't an area that's empty, or maybe there's an area, the areas are full, but in this part of the country, this was done 5 years ago, and there's been nothing since. So we're going to look for you to know who you're reaching and who you're not reaching, and any efforts you can make to reach out to those who are underserved. Also identifying maybe who is not moving forward, people who you may have funded with training, but checking with them to say, what have you done to implement that training? Have you done a project that has allowed you to use your training? If you got a re-grant, what did you do after that re-grant? Was that just a project you did and then you haven't moved forward since? Because we do want institutions to move forward and also to learn how to sustain the activities that they've learned to do. So that's going to be an important area as well, that you are looking out for everybody in your state and making sure that you may have to do a special outreach to reach those who are not responding and who you want to respond. Or I know that in some areas they might not appreciate contact from someone at the state government, finding someone who's in the area near some repositories to reach out and say, you know, I'm your friendly neighborhood archives, and we'd like to let you know about these training opportunities, these funding opportunities, or whatever programming that you have. So we're looking at that as well. Now let me move us here. There we go. Now, in addition to the board programming, we have a new, we did a lot at the November meeting, which was not helped by them being closed down for 4 weeks. A new grant program called Archives Collaboratives. And this program is also meant to reach out to people who have not been provided with the resources they might need so that they can advance and become more sustainable. This has two, it's somewhat like our Major Initiatives program, it has two different pieces to it. The Archives Collaboratives Planning Grants, which has a deadline coming up just next month, April 4th, is for just kind of putting together people you want to work with, putting together partners around a certain issue, and then developing ideas and efforts that can be shared. So you don't have to develop programming. You don't have to actually provide the assistance yet. This is to basically plan to see how this might work. These are $25,000 grants. We didn't really put a time period for the grant, but I'm pushing 6 months to 9 months so that you're getting finished by the time that the implementation grants come due. So basically, these are not meant to be long drawn-out processes, but ways for you to identify what needs to be done and then put together ideas for implementing them. So the idea behind this is to get 3 or more partners together, and the partners can be located in the same community, the same state, geographical area. They can be virtual collaborators who are just all over the country and basically do their work virtually. They can be institutions that maybe have the same collecting policy, the same scope of collections, the same subject matter that they have. You can have institutions that have the same organizational mission or that serve similar types of communities. So we've had contact with several groups that are doing both statewide partnership, planning to do statewide partnerships, as well as some that are doing very localized, just kind of a city and a county governments getting together, and instead of them each doing their own activities, they're going to be joining so that they can create and store records in common that they each create, but that are similar and that they can keep together so researchers aren't wondering, where do I go to get that? And then you've got to go to the county office for this and the city office for that. So we have different kinds of ideas, and we're kind of not saying, oh, this is how it has to be. This is part of the reason for this is to find out what are the ideas people have and what are the needs that people see. We're not going to tell you what your need is. We want to hear from you what you say your need is so that we can then know also where we might be targeting for other grant programs as well to make sure we're not missing out on people. These don't have to be a big mentor institution looking after a group of smaller institutions. It could be several mid-sized who just get together who maybe separately can't pull off a project but together can. So once again, we're really looking for you to tell us what might work and how this all might work. Then the implementation grants, which are likely to be due in January, I'm hoping we can piggyback them with the major initiatives deadline in the middle of January so that we don't have too many deadlines out there and people get confused about what to apply for or when. This is for formally establishing the partnership. During your planning grant, you may identify more people than you put in your planning application, and that's fine. Or people may say, yeah, this isn't for me, and they drop out and someone else takes their place. Or you fine-tune what you want to do. So this second one is for implementing the ideas and the efforts that you created during the planning grant, and these will likely be one-year applications. Now, the planning grants have no cost-sharing requirement. We'll pay the whole cost of the project, so you don't have to worry about trying to figure out a budget for who's going to put in how much time at how much cost. Don't have to worry about that. And the collaborative implementation grants have only a 25% cost sharing, so they're similar to the board grants that have only a 25% cost share, and we'll fund the rest of that. Now, for this program, what I've done, and some of you have actually been involved in this, is what you can do about that new program. And part of it was spreading the word about the program. I sent out last fall an email to folks about saying, here's this new program, and we'd like you to help identify maybe institutions that would like to apply or areas of work that might need to be accomplished through planning grants. Also identifying mentor institutions that might lead an effort, which might be even the institutions of board members who could do that. So the state archives might be, but also the university or the county clerk or whoever else might be on your board who might want to help with a collaborative project. Encouraging collaboration among program participants. If you've awarded re-grants to some similar institutions, and you might say they could benefit from getting together and working together, or if you've got people who took part in training or received scholarships and you think they could work together, looking at folks who already know you and have benefited from your resources to see if they might be interested in something like this. And then, of course, creating a state board program that helps to encourage collaboration, mentoring, and these activities, which you could be doing under your board programming grant, since many of you already do that, but also could be done under this type of program as well, with the state board possibly working with others. I know that several state boards already work with other organizations, and they help provide training so that each organization doesn't have to provide the training, but it's done through partnerships. I saw Jan Davis's name here, so I'll bring up Oklahoma, where they work with the library folks and the museum folks, and they kind of coordinate their training so that they're not each out there trying to do advertising separately and offering training separately, and it's just much easier if you can coordinate and use other people's resources in addition to your own. Okay. Other programs, I know that some states are going back to people, this is Massachusetts especially, where they're not just offering one assessment, but the person who does that assessment continues to be available to them so that they can continue to answer the questions that people may have. After you've had an assessment, you may think you've got it all down, and then questions arise. Up in Vermont, they're working to develop regional collaboratives so that in each of I didn't realize there were 11 regions in Vermont. That's what they tell me. So each one of those where there is someone who's willing to coordinate and work with other agencies, other repositories in that area to do those activities. And as I had mentioned before, if you have re-grant recipients, of going back to them and saying, what can we do for you now? So these basically getting people to work together, and then you as state boards helping to make sure people don't just sit and rest on the one project they may have done or the one workshop they've gone to, but that you keep up with people and working with them to make sure that they can sustain what they've done and that they can enhance their programs. So that's enough of that from me. So I'll send this back to Beth.
Thank you, Dan. And Chris, thank you very much. There's a lot going on at NHPRC, a lot of grant opportunities, different types of grant programs. So it's great information. Thank you for that. And we have plenty of time for questions from anybody who's listening. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to start typing your questions. And in the meantime, I was curious about something that you mentioned. Dan, you talked about cases where halfway through a grant, we might realize that the grantee really isn't able to do everything that we hoped they were capable of doing. And I wondered if there are training or resources available to the state boards to grant reviewers to help them in critically and effectively evaluating grant applications to make sure that institutions are capable of doing what they propose to do, or in strategic planning or in other areas where we might be providing grants. Any resources that are available, anything in development that we might know about?
Yeah, in that area, the focus on digitization, we do realize that sometimes work takes longer than you think. So this doesn't mean that somebody who was hoping to do 1,000 photographs and only able to do 900, that's a big problem. You know, we have that in every grant program. Things happen. But it's people making sure that they do know how to catalog those photographs and that they do know how to do the digitization, and not that maybe they get a little behind in their work because of somebody had to take a few weeks off. So I think what we're planning to do in response to last year's the annual meeting that we had board members and coordinators together, two areas that we are going to be offering resources on either as webinars or as PowerPoint presentations that can be done at board meetings or however is useful for people. I believe that Sean Rounds in Minnesota had asked for strategic planning assistance, so we'll be putting together something for that. And I believe that Jelaine in Texas had asked for how to review applications. And I think what we'll add to that is not just how to review applications, but how to put together good guidelines for re-grant programs or any kind of program that you receive an application, so that you don't end up with less information than you wanted. So I think one thing we'll be asking about now and in the future is the delivery systems for those. If you'd like to be able to just send your board members a video and have them watch it whenever they have time, or if this is training you'd like to have, that maybe we put together something that, a PowerPoint or something that's non-video that you could just put up on a computer in your board meeting and look at and go through, and we'd give you a script for it. Or we could even take you through it. As I said, I've called into several boards in the past and kind of reviewed things. So it's something we could do live, something we can do through video that you can just let people see about. The review process might be useful for new board members. That might be something that you'd want to just have available for each individual as you get new board members, and not something that you have to do a whole presentation for the entire board every time. So kind of delivery systems and topics that will help you. I think we're always interested in hearing about those. So hopefully those are going to be coming after the May meeting of the Commission.
Great. We do have a question also in the Q&A. Somebody snuck in there, asking if the new collaborative grants would be appropriate for pulling together small local repositories to digitize collections and add them to the DPLA.
Yeah, the planning grants would kind of be for deciding things like, do people have the right type of guidelines for doing this? What type of institutions should do it themselves? What type of institutions maybe should seek assistance? So I think anything like that where you bring together people who maybe can't do something alone, but with some partners are able to do it, even if it's submitting online finding aids or learning how to create an EAD finding aid if that's necessary, or becoming contributors to either a DPL or a regional, one of the more regional ones, or even a state-based one. So I think that's something we're looking at, is just getting things that will help provide better access to records that are important but are not held in repositories that maybe can go it alone quite yet.
Thank you. Kathy Marquis, that was your question. I hope that answered your question. Don't know if you have a follow-up on that. If anybody else has questions, if you can just type them into the chat box so we can see them and get those answered for you as well.
Okay, I'm looking at Lizette is talking about re-grant application. Yeah, let me look at that to find out what different states are doing for online applications. I know a few have them, and I don't think they would use them if they were either cumbersome or too expensive. So I can look into that and let everybody know kind of how that's working.
Right, that question was, we're looking for an online grant application tool. The original one we were looking at has become too expensive. What are other boards using? So if anyone else is using something, you want to respond to that, put that in the chat box.
That wouldn't just be for re-grants, that would be for other types of activities that you get applications for.
And if there are state board members who are on, board coordinators, if you have certain types of assistance other than what's been mentioned that you feel would be helpful to you, if you want to let us know what types of assistance you feel you need, what form you'd like to see that assistance take, what areas do you need more information about, if you want to ask those questions in the chat box as well.
Beth, this is Barbara. I had a question. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I wondered, I think these new grant announcements with the legal materials and the Archives Collaborative programs are really exciting, and I wondered if the Commission had anything else on tap for like 2019, other changes that might be coming, or if that may be enough change for a couple of meetings, or what are you all thinking about that, Dan and Chris?
My guess is that they're going to, at the May meeting, they'll see both the early legal records applications, and I think that look will help them define, well, is this exactly what we want to do? We need to be more specific about it. How long are we going to do this? Is this a 2-3 year? Do we need to give it a lot of time? And maybe then also how they might want to look at other areas. Some of you, I don't know if any of you have been here long enough, we used to have a little orange booklet called Program Emphases that we published before there was an online, and it basically said, here's our emphases for the next 2 years, and then after a while we changed those. So my guess is they may refine the early legal records. They might look at other areas they might use as emphases. And then with the planning grants, I think they'll look at that as well and decide, is this kind of an emphasis we might want to put in other programming we have, or refine how they describe it. You know, are we directing people in the direction we want them to go? And so I think we're going to see, rather than a lot of new stuff, is refining what we've kind of implemented over the last year or so. That's my guess.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't see any other questions coming in the chat box or in the Q&A. So what I will do now is turn this back over to Barbara and Lisa, and they will give you some coming attractions for the rest of the year.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that, Beth, and thanks, Chris and Dan, for the really good overview of what's going on within NHPRC. Really appreciate it. We just have a couple of things that are coming up. I don't want to keep you all too much longer since we may be able to give you a few minutes back to your day. But we do have the 2019 CoSA SAA annual meeting coming up in early August, and there's going to be big announcement coming out late, not a big announcement, but the actual as much about the program as we can share for CoSA sessions and what's going to happen for CoSA members. So we'll have more information coming. But there are a few highlights here, including a change in the schedule because of the way that the annual meeting is working this year with SAA's contract with this hotel in Austin. The CoSA work session will be Saturday, August 3rd in the afternoon, and the business meeting and the SHRAB discussion that we normally have with snacks or lunch is going to be on Sunday, August 4th. So that's a little bit of a change for everyone who's used to attending our annual meetings. So we'll be sending out more detailed information about that. And when you get it, and if you have any questions, be sure and let me know. One thing I don't have on this slide, but I think is really important for everyone to think about, our annual awards program. The deadline for award submission is April 1st, and we have a great opportunity to honor people within CoSA. So please think about nominating someone for an award. There's plenty of information on the CoSA website about it, or if you want more information, just let me know. Oh, sorry, I don't know how to use the slides. I apologize. There we go. Okay, we do have some more member webinars coming up. This was traditionally we have 2 SHRAB town halls, and we're really glad to always have Dan and Chris and other people from NHPRC and the state boards to participate in the SHRAB town halls in February and September. In April, we have our annual advocacy webinar, and then in October, we feature our Young Leader Award winners. But the rest of our webinars for this year are going to be about emergency preparedness and response. We're getting together all the information about those, and you can register on our webpage. You can register for the rest of the year if you want to get everything on your calendar and get your registration in early. The next webinar is March 28th, just a month from today, and we're going to be featuring Lori Foley from the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. And as you know, Lori's been really busy over the past couple of years with all the disasters and doing a lot of coordinating. I think you'll be really interested to come to that webinar, as well as all of the other webinars. And we also have the State Electronic Records Initiative, or SERI. The Education and Programming Committee from that group has a great webinar lineup scheduled for the year. If you visit the SERI webpage, you can also pre-register for all of those webinars. They have a really good lineup for the year, but particularly you might be interested in LOCKS, the LOCKS program that is headquartered at Stanford University, has some really interesting things going on, and we've been talking with them about some collaboration, so I think you'll be interested to hear about that. And then, of course, you'll want to come to the blockchain webinar because we all need to know a little bit more about that, and we'll have some other good webinars in May and June with the SERI program. We also have, as usual, a lot of events that we're commemorating. Tomorrow is the last day of Endangered Data Week. We really have had a good week on social media this week, thanks to CoSA's Communications Coordinator, Ann Ackerson, and our social media volunteer, Amanda Myers from the Illinois State Archives, who've worked on that this week. So thank you very much for that. If you haven't taken a look at CoSA's Twitter or Facebook, we've been sharing a lot of information about Endangered Data Week. We'll also be doing the same thing with the Sunshine Week coming up in just a few weeks. The Sunshine Week website finally was just updated, so if you take a look at that, there are a lot of resources that you can use in your archives and that we'll be using at CoSA as well. And we have our mid-year board meeting coming up. After that, you'll hear lots of information about decisions that CoSA has made, activities we've been working on, so we'll share information with the membership after that. There's also a great opportunity for many of us to see each other at the Best Practices Exchange in Columbus, Ohio at the end of April, the 1st of May, where we have, CoSA has a couple of sessions on the program. I think we have several other state archives presenters, in addition to just being just a great conference where you go and share ideas and have a lot of discussion. It looks as if it's going to be a fun time in Columbus. So if you're able to join us, please do. And the NAGARA Annual Conference is coming up in St. Paul in July. I've just seen the program. I don't know if everyone else has too, or, well, we have a CoSA session on that as well. So that may be why I've seen it, and I don't know if it's really released or not. But it looks really good. There are a lot of good sessions and great presenters, so I'm sure you'll look forward to seeing that too. And the CoSA SAA annual meeting, registration, hotel information, and program will all be coming out soon. I was able to attend the CoSA, the program committee meeting in Chicago last month with our program committee representatives, and was able to see what's been selected for the program. And I think everyone will definitely want to attend and hear the great sessions, in addition to all of the many CoSA activities we're going to have packed in over those few days. And as always, towards the end of our webinars, we thank our sponsors, because our CoSA corporate sponsors are very helpful to us in supporting us financially and also in helping us with important projects. Ancestry has been a long-term sponsor, as have Family Search, Preservica, Apex Software. LibNova is a new sponsor last year, and we're happy to have them aboard. And Space Saver has been a sponsor for several years. Gaylord Archival is a great sponsor and also helped us last year with, and the year before, with sending disaster preparedness or disaster recovery supplies to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So we thank them for that. And our friends from NHPRC are on here. We really appreciate all the support we've had from NHPRC over the years, not just for CoSA, but for all our member institutions and our state historical records advisory boards too. And CoSA currently has a fairly large grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to reach out and work with other state associations to collaborate to increase the importance of and the understanding of the importance of electronic records management and digital preservation in state government. And we really want you to join us on the website, the Resource Center, see what we're doing on Twitter and Facebook, and we also have our CoSA YouTube channel. I really love to always say we have a YouTube channel, but this webinar and all of our other webinars are available on the YouTube channel, so you can go back and see recordings that we've made since we've been doing webinars, and we have a lot of information on the YouTube channel, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. We try to share things from other state archives and sort of aggregate information as we see it come by. And the Resource Center continues to grow as we're working on beefing that up through the IMLS grant and going through and getting data from states that we think where we see we have holes. We're trying to contact states and get information added. But you're also you can add information to the Resource Center anytime. Just check that link, and it'll give you instructions about what you need to do. I encourage you to do that, because the more information we have in the Resource Center, the more useful it is for all of us. And I did want to thank you for attending the webinar today and let you know really how important it is for you to help us evaluate today's webinar and to give us feedback on future topics. Your opinions are really important to us, and we look forward to hearing from you, so I hope you will take a few minutes. It won't even take a few minutes. Just take a little bit of time to fill out the evaluation for us to let us know how today was and if you have ideas for future webinars. Also, thanks very much to Beth for moderating. I think she may be a permanent moderator. She did such a great job. Thank you, Beth. And thanks again to Chris Eck and Dan Stokes from NHPRC for being with us today. And please do complete the evaluation as you exit the webinar. And thanks so much for joining us today. Bye-bye, everyone.